developed, and U.S. firms found that domestic demand was falling extremely rapidly. As households found that they could no longer meet the payments on their mortgages, in fact, for many people, the value of their outstanding mortgages was higher than the value of the households. You then had the second round impact, which was the impact on the real sector through a decline in demand domestically in the United States, and then the decline in demand for imports from the Western world.
La primera ronda había afectado más que nada a los mercados financieros, de la primera ronda de la crisis, digamos. Pero en un segundo término afectó mucho a la economía doméstica porque cayó mucho la actividad y afectó mucho a las familias que se habían endeudado, tenían un montón de hipotecas. Bajó el valor de las hipotecas, por lo tanto las familias, las casas no alcanzaban para pagar las deudas, y eso dio un giro, y eso fue lo que terminó afectando a la actividad doméstica y a través de la baja de las importaciones al resto del mundo.
So that you had a very sharp decline in global exports of goods and services, joined at the same time by a very sharp decline in the demand and in the prices of primary commodities.
Por lo tanto, lo que hubo fue una importante caída en las exportaciones globales hacia Estados Unidos y en el precio de las commodities, precio internacional de las commodities.
Now, the impact on primary commodities came from two different sides. The first side was that much of the increase in the prices of petroleum and other primary commodities had come from a shift in U.S. financial institutions towards the provision of what were called real return funds or commodity index funds, that is, investing in real goods and services, particularly primary commodities, in order to provide an inflation hedge for domestic investors.
El golpe a los precios de las commodities vino de varios lados. Por un lado, el hecho de que hubo un cambio en el sistema financiero norteamericano, que se empezó a invertir en índices de commodities, en bienes reales, para cubrirse ante la inflación, o sea, invertir en bienes reales para cubrirse ante justamente el proceso inflacionario.
A large number of financial institutions that ran these commodity index funds, Goldman Sachs is a good example, also used their management of these funds to generate speculative profits by speculating on the changes in prices that would come from the execution of the orders for the clients that had bought these commodity funds. So there was a second movement, or second support, increasing these prices, which came from financial institutions using financial leverage in order to increase the prices of petroleum and primary commodities.
Una segunda ronda de ataque contra los precios se dio porque las propias instituciones financieras empezaron a especular con el valor de las commodities primarias, incluso a través de apalancamiento, para tratar de inflar aún más el valor de las commodities en el sector petrolero.
So the collapse of the U.S. financial system eliminated this demand for commodities at the same time as the real demand from the level of activity was falling, which then brought a very sharp decline in the prices of petroleum and the prices of most other internationally traded primary commodities. And it was this impact which then spread the second wave of the crisis, which went beyond the emerging market economies to the least developed economies, hitting in particular economies in Africa, which are primarily dependent on their exports and the prices of primary commodities.
Y fue esto fue lo que impulsó la segunda ola de la crisis, tanto la caída en la demanda doméstica de Estados Unidos como la caída en los precios de los productos de las commodities. Afectó no solo a los países medianamente desarrollados, sino incluso a los menos desarrollados como África, cuyas exportaciones dependen principalmente de esta clase de bienes de commodities primarias.
So if we look at the crisis, it really has a, if you like, a multiple dimension which has not been present in previous crises, because it has managed to hit financial markets in developed and emerging market countries. It's managed to have an impact on primary commodity prices, and in particular on the level of real trade in the system, and also even the least developed economies, which have very little participation in the international financial system and are more or less dependent for their minimum standard of living on the primary commodities markets. So that there is this dimension not only of the very rich bankers losing their wealth, but one other dimension that we can't forget is that it is driving large proportions of those people who are living on the poverty line below the minimums that they require in order to survive. So it's a crisis which really has hit virtually all scale and all aspects of global income distribution.
Esta crisis tiene muchas dimensiones, por lo tanto, no solo en el sector financiero norteamericano y de los países ricos, sino que ha bajado el comercio real por el impacto en la actividad doméstica. Estados Unidos bajó el comercio global, y además incluso en países, en regiones que ni participaban del mercado financiero norteamericano y de los países desarrollados, que dependen de los precios de esas commodities. Por lo tanto, es una crisis que ha atravesado casi toda la escala de ingresos de los países.
So that if we look at the response to the crisis, the natural response to the crisis, everybody's heard, I'm sure, about the stimulus packages, the very large government expenditure packages which the developed countries have introduced in order to counter the crisis. But we also have to remember that the least developed countries really are not in a position to engage in the same kinds of stimulus policies in order to provide a counter to the impact of the crisis.
Cuando vemos las respuestas típicas a la crisis, todos habrán escuchado de los paquetes de estímulo del gobierno estadounidense, de su economía, pero hay que tener en cuenta que los países menos desarrollados no están en condiciones de proveer esos paquetes para sus economías para enfrentar la crisis.
So that when we talk about having a global response or a globally coordinated stimulus response to the crisis, in general, really what we're talking about is simply a global response that includes the industrialized countries and the emerging market countries, and in general tends to leave out of account what is the largest proportion of the population of the globe that is in fact suffering from the basic impact of the crisis.
Por ende, cuando se habla de coordinación fiscal para impulsar paquetes de estímulo, se habla de los países industrializados y de los mercados emergentes, pero se deja fuera de la discusión a países aún más chicos, que son los que sufren el impacto básico de la crisis.
Now, this raises a particularly difficult problem because if we look at the global response, in general the response has been to increase the amount of liquidity or the amount of funding which is available to the International Monetary Fund in order to support countries that are facing external difficulties as a result